Within the zone, there are several factions operating that have their own particular goals and ideals. Each faction wants to be the one to have control over the zone. Factions form when like-minded individuals have similar ideals and recognize that they have a common interest. By grouping together, stalkers have a much better chance of survival. Such a group can grow until it reaches a massive size. These groups begin to make some serious money and are able to obtain professional equipment. And the chaos that is the activity of the zone is obviously advantageous to work in a group, as opposed to going it alone with no backup. When I look at the factions in Stalker, I see different types of people represented by each group. Each group seems to reflect a particular mindset or way of being for a person. They seem to correspond to an aspect of human nature. Perhaps they are all parts of ourselves competing to see who will be the dominant one in control of the zone. By controlling the zone, a faction has the ability to unlock the secrets of the noosphere and the sea consciousness. I'd like to interpret this as the different aspects of our collective consciousness trying to come to dominate the noosphere, or, in another way, a struggle in our own consciousness between the different aspects of our personalities. I think this is an excellent way to look at the different factions. People have different parts that make up their psyche, separate pieces of their personality that make up who they are. In simple terms, the psyche is the totality of the human mind, consciousness and unconsciousness. These form the basis for a scientific, but not perfect, understanding of human nature. From this, we get the different schools of thought on psychology and the relationship of different parts of the psyche to each other. All of us have the capacity to be greedy, altruistic, selfish, loving, evil, or good. A person's personality can be quite dynamic. We all have different aspects to ourselves which we accept as a part of who we are, or at least we should accept. The factions, as I've said, I see are different aspects of human nature all trying to achieve dominance of the consciousness. I think when we look at them and what their goals and values are, we can definitely get that impression. They certainly cover a wide range of ideas. The groups are so appropriately named. They stand as a direct description of the ideals that each group holds. I'm inclined to think this was deliberate, but I don't know that for sure. A paramilitary group, known for its discipline, whose members live according to a strict code. Duty members are the only group who refuse to trade unique items from the zone with the outside world. According to rumors, all artifacts found by the group are passed on to the scientists. Its members consider protecting the outside world from the zone's dangers is their primary objective. Most of the group's operations concern destroying monsters, hence duty raids often save normal stalkers from serious trouble. The faction has long been at war with freedom. Duty is largely made up of Ukrainian military troops and special forces units that were abandoned inside the zone by the government during various operations. They have a good experience in dealing with the zone and its various hazards. Initial expeditions began in 2009, where the military was sent in to investigate the area. At this point, people were sneaking in to find artifacts and loot valuables left behind. The government meant to lock the area down to prevent the spread of contaminated objects and protect the public from anomalies. These excursions into the zone were plagued with mutant attacks that forced the army to retreat. A man named Captain Tachenko led a force of soldiers into the zone with the goal of destroying it with nuclear explosives. Unfortunately, there was a gigantic emission that took place, and Captain Tachenko and his closest officers faked a communication breakdown that allowed all of them to desert the military and join stalkers in looting the zone. Duty is the organization formed out of these AWOL soldiers following Captain Tachenko. According to the official game story, an incident broke out afterward that changed what Duty was. Tachenko was never held accountable, the story effectively silenced by he and the other higher-ups. During a routine artifact hunting trip, however, he and his fellow conspirators were trapped in a spatial anomaly. While they searched for a way out of the anomaly on the 6th day, a colonel named Kosmak suffered a nervous breakdown and shot 2 other duty officers before finally shooting himself. The last 2 survivors, Tachenko and his attendant named Japerny, split up. Tachenko never saw the attendant again, and it is revealed that he later died. Tachenko then recorded his final moments and his thoughts on his PDA before killing himself. With its original leader lost, General Krylov, one of the soldiers that served with Captain Tachenko in their failed mission, assumed leadership and set up a base of operations in the Agripom Research Institute, initiating their research into the nature of the mutants the zone breeds. Duty's mission became investigating the zone and the experiments that were being conducted by the former Soviet government. In the basement of the Agripom Research Institute, archives were found telling of experiments of mind control on local wildlife. It is assumed that there were experiments carried out on people as well. Duty sees altruism in defending the world from a problem. This is altruism, doing what is right from the position of defending the common good. They represent doing what is good to help everyone and protect everyone. And then we see the altruism of people who just want to help. They want to be selfless in order to have a better world for everyone. In their eyes, they should control the zone because they're the only ones who have the sincere intention and the ability to get the job done. They also want to destroy it. We also see another reflection of this in their cooperation with scientists, the ecologists, who also represent a form of altruism. Duty believes in the noble pursuit of scientific discovery because of what good can come out of it. The ecologists seek to unlock the secrets of the zone, which would provide a wealth of scientific discoveries. If the secrets can be unlocked, Duty can achieve its goal of destroying the zone. Duty is so appropriately named. The whole group is based on the self-perceived duty to protect the world from the zone. This is best expressed in their own propaganda broadcast. They're a great analogy for altruism and its relation to the Soviet Union, as well as communism itself. There is a goal that must be achieved, and the means to carry it out depend on the difficulty and danger reaching that goal. The zone is expanding, unleashing its dangers upon the world. The other factions interfering with the goal of securing and eliminating this threat also present a danger. Thus, Duty is justified in using what violent means are necessary in ending the threat to mankind. If the objective situation is class war, then the threat should be met with war itself. If the ruling class will use violence to subjugate the people, then the people should use violence to defend themselves to better their situation. People are naturally born to be altruistic and cooperative. Charles Darwin is a great source on the origins of man. He never believed in the survival of the fittest. He never said this. It was actually Herbert Spencer and the social Darwinists who created this concept by altering what Darwin theorized in order to justify their ridiculous ideas of racial superiority. In fact, he quite advocated the opposite. In Darwin's first book about humans, The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex from 1871, Darwin argued for the greater strength of the social and material instincts than that of any other instinct or motive. His reasoning was disarmingly intuitive. In our hominid predecessors, communities of more sympathetic individuals were more successful in raising healthier offspring to the age of viability and reproduction, the sine qua non of evolution. Sympathetic touches are processed by receptors under the surface of the skin and set in motion by a cascade of beneficial psychological responses. In one recent study, female participants waiting anxiously for an electric shock showed activation in threat-related regions of the brain. A response quickly turned off when their hand was held by a loved one nearby. Friendly touch stimulates activation in the vagus nerve, and a bundle of nerves in the chest that calms the fight or flight cardiovascular response and triggers the release of oxytocin, which enables feelings of trust. Duty seeks to be an analogy for this altruism and back it up with some serious firepower in order to protect mankind from the dangers of the zone. Is it any wonder that we see them in such conflict with freedom? Anarchists and daredevils who declare themselves fighters for free access to the zone and consequently find themselves in constant conflict with the army, military stalkers, and the Duty faction. These so-called freedom warriors believe in sharing all information about the zone with the rest of the world and challenging the state's monopoly over the zone's secrets and wonders. Freedom was formed out of stalkers who have a different idea about what to do with the zone and how it should be approached. They see it as a marvel that should be shared with everyone, and people should live freely inside of it. They began as a clan of stalkers who wanted open-air research, meaning the results of investigation experiments, to be available to everyone. They believe in express liberty for all of its members, but this attracts a lot of rogues and people who simply wish to do whatever they want, causing problems for others. Because of this, duty is very antagonistic towards their goal. Freedom is rather a paradox. They reject hierarchy and discipline, yet they still need a power structure in order to make the faction work. Freedom is like other factions, a military structure first. They do have a very informal association. The command structure is not so rigid, and people often don't use ranks when addressing each other. This informality has always led to a weaker combat structure than duty, and has forced them to remain relatively always on the defensive against them. According to the official story, freedom has a decentralized command structure. While they are well organized and follow designated commanders in combat, outside of it, freedomers simply do whatever they feel like doing, or whatever they're good at. Freedom had 3 distinct leaders by 2012: Chekhov, Lukács, and Loki. Each of them ran the faction slightly different with different goals, but still for the same cause of allowing free access to the zone, and the same bitter rivalries against their longtime nemesis, duty. Freedom is the antithesis of duty. They represent total freedom of movement and exploration of the zone for everyone. In their view, the wonders of the zone should be open to everyone to investigate and see for themselves. But at the same time, they don't see the zone as a threat to mankind. The zone is expanding, but for some reason, they don't see this as a bad thing. I can't determine why this is. Clearly the zone is a threat as it generates dangers to the public at large. During the course of the game, freedom is often accused of being anarchists, and there's a lot of anarchist symbology throughout the game. I've not seen any dialogue by characters which would indicate that it's really a position that they hold. It would seem more like something someone would accuse a group of if they didn't have a strict social structure or hierarchy. In another way, it does seem very anarchist. There is a great emphasis on individualism, but with a reluctance to accept that collective effort is needed to accomplish a goal. That goal here is the same as it is in real life now: freedom for individualism against certain types of power structures. They want an individualistic world, but reject the necessary collaborative and leadership efforts required in order to achieve and preserve it. I think this was put well by Stalin. The point is that Marxism and anarchism are built upon entirely different principles, in spite of the fact that both come into the arena of struggle under the flag of socialism. The cornerstone of anarchism is the individual, whose emancipation according to its tenets is the principal condition for the emancipation of the masses, the collective body. According to the tenets of anarchism, the emancipation of the masses is impossible until the individual is emancipated. Accordingly, its slogan is "everything for the individual." The cornerstone of Marxism, however, is the masses, whose emancipation according to its tenets is the principal condition for the emancipation of the individual. That is to say, according to the tenets of Marxism, the emancipation of the individual is impossible until the masses are emancipated accordingly. Its slogan is "everything for the masses." Clearly, we have 2 principles, one negating the other, and not merely disagreements on tactics. Freedom really stands for a rejection of authority and conscious organization to reject authority. To them, their individuality is something that goes beyond something that they believe in, to something that they want to see enforced by organization. This is rather paradoxical and could be seen as a kind of hypocrisy. It would seem that in developing an organization to spread individuality would be the opposite of supporting individuality. There is a much better example of this individuality among lone stalkers who don't join a faction and instead choose to work on their own. Sometimes they work alongside a faction if they deem it necessary or advantageous. Individuality, it would seem, is better expressed by not joining a faction than joining one with a stated goal of preserving and expanding individualism. Monolith is a cult that surrounds the wish granter in the zone itself. They are a cult in a very literal sense. Its members express no individuality, no ability to speak about anything. Virtually nothing is known about their organizational structure, as no member has ever been taken alive. They are completely without fear and will fight to the death without retreat. Even when running out of ammunition, they have been found to charge at the enemy with their bare hands. They are also impossible to capture. Once one has been apprehended, they attempt to commit suicide as quickly as possible in any way possible. Some have been seen smashing their heads against walls. They are mindless killing machines, totally in the service of the sea consciousness. Their prayer, led by a preacher, indicates as much.
We thank you, O Monolith, for revealing the cunning plans of your enemies to us. May your light shine down on the souls of the brave soldiers who gave their lives in service to your will. Onward, warriors of the Monolith, avenge your fallen brothers, blessed as they are in their eternal union with the Monolith. Bring death to those who've spurned the holy power of the Monolith. O Monolith, we do not hear you. Why have you left us, O Monolith? We await your orders, O Monolith.
The Monolith is hostile to all factions, as their primary goal is to keep all stalkers away from the zone, even the military. They answer only to the sea consciousness and are probably directly mind-controlled, although priests have been seen that seem to have some kind of capability to communicate with them. Often they fall into trances in which they move their torsos in a circular motion. In these trances, soldiers become completely unaware of their surroundings. People can be shot right next to them, grenades go off, and they won't notice. They usually take place in front of a totem made out of scrap materials all gathered together in some kind of obelisk. The only known leader of the organization is Chiron, of which there is almost nothing known. He seems to be the head of the Monolith headquarters in Pripyat. In the battlefield, there are leaders which are also priests. These stalkers are snipers who serve as guides to direct forces. They usually stand in very high places chanting phrases for the purpose of driving on their soldiers and demoralizing the enemy. Aside from these exceptions, there is a mention of a specific group of Monolith stalkers. There seems to be only one organized unit called Crystal, which is dedicated to protecting the actual monolith and the sarcophagus which contains it. Monolith soldiers are extremely well equipped, having access to the best weapons that exist. It is suspected that there are Monolith agents that have corrupt military contracts, which they purchase weapons from. Their armor and their clothing are generally homemade. This includes not only their own combat suits, but the radiation suits and exoskeletons. This would seem to suggest that they have access to at least some engineering skills in order to be able to produce them. They are also the only faction which utilizes Gauss guns, a very deadly, futuristic, highly advanced weapon that uses magnets to fire projectiles. The Monolith army is actually made up of former stalkers. Part of the sea consciousness security are several psionic devices that interfere with the operation of the human brain. They're a kind of psychic machinery that can affect a person's mind. The most notable example of them is the brain scorcher from Shadow of Chernobyl. These devices are designed to brainwash any stalker that gets too close to the power plant. Essentially, they are partially erased, and the mind of the victim is reprogrammed to serve the interests of the sea consciousness via the Monolith faction. Although stalkers seem to be aware of these devices, many still try to reach the Chernobyl NPP. Like duty and freedom, Monolith also represents a certain type of morality. Duty stands for strict discipline, rigid military hierarchy and organization. Freedom represents the opposite, the rejection of illegitimate authority. In their view, there must be freedom from such a system. Monolith, on the other hand, clearly represents religious authority. The group literally is a religious cult in which no one has any independent thought. They represent humanity in its most mindless and dangerous state, a religious fervor driven on by holy men and not political leaders. Clearly, this draws parallels with the Crusades, in which countless Christian warriors were sent forth to destroy anyone who wasn't a member of their religion. Obviously, humanity at its most ignorant. I think the group also symbolizes the scaremongering of the bourgeois theory towards communism. Since Monolith soldiers are controlled by the sea consciousness, which is an analogy for communism, I think it's fair to see them as people living in a communist society. This is the general uninformed view of what life was like under the Soviet Union and in communism in general. They really think that communism is one gigantic cult where everyone is brainwashed into thinking whatever the leader says is correct. Often they will drag Orwell's pitiful anti-Stalin work out as an example of this. The irony of using a work of fiction as an example to attack a society is lost on them. Essentially, Monolith serves as a straw man to attack communism. Again, this is only my interpretation of the symbolism in the game. I think it's very sad that such people can't tell the difference between mass cooperation and a cult. Of course, communism is nothing like this. When we speak of communism, we speak of a cohesive plan to make society work. People cooperate to make a society function. Believe it or not, this is not any different than any other society. Every system needs to have a plan and a method of functioning. There are no exceptions. People are expected to cooperate with this method. Real communists use a system of democratic centralism. This is usually described as democracy in discussion, centralism in action. This organizational method was developed by Vladimir Lenin for the Bolshevik Party. The idea is made up of three key aspects. Proletarian or participatory democracy. The principles of proletarian democracy were given its most objective demonstration in the Paris Commune. As directed by Lenin in his State and Revolution, proletarian democracy implies the widest, most democratic, and most exhaustive discussion prior to any decision. It emphasizes the right of people to determine their own activity. It opposes the separation of legislative and executive branches, i.e. the division of labor between the administration and labor, theory and practice. Consequently, democratic centralism implies that an organization ought to be so structured as to provide the capacity for any part of organization to participate in determining policies relevant to their own responsibilities. Unity in action. Unity is a fundamental question for survival of the working class, but it is in the nature of an oppressed class that if it is to emancipate itself, unity cannot be achieved by orders from above, but can only be based on agreement and commitment achieved by means of proletarian democracy among members whose commitment to the organization is consistent with their rights within it. When a policy has been determined by means of protracted and thoroughgoing discussion amongst those who might carry it out, then unity in action is easily achieved. However, action inevitably implies unforeseen obstacles and changes which require an instant and coordinated response. It is inescapable that effective coordination in action presupposes leadership, which is obeyed without question. Consequently, unity in action necessarily involves an acceptance of leadership. It is this problem which has been the source of the most pain and controversy in the history of the workers' movement. The balance between centralism and democracy. A small group of soldiers under enemy fire would be ill-advised to subject their tactics to thoroughgoing discussion. Total centralism is the best policy, with one of their number assuming the responsibility to issue instructions. On the other hand, a trade union deciding whether or not to accept the boss's offer or continue the strike can and must take as long as it is necessary to ensure that every member of the strike is in agreement on what to do. Consensus decision-making is the order of the day, and leaders should take a back seat. What we have here, in reality, is far removed from how Monolith operates. However, Monolith does accurately reflect how bourgeois theory views communism. The Monolith clan was originally a group of stalkers united by their fascination with the zone. Fascination turned to obsession, and obsession turned to fanaticism. Eventually, the stalkers became convinced there was a massive artifact in the center of the zone, a monolith, and declared themselves its protectors, growing increasingly hostile to other stalkers. They disappeared in 2011 just before the beginning of Clear Sky, simply picking up all of their belongings and marching through the barrier towards the Brain Scorcher shortly before an emission. No one has heard from them since, or so they thought, as later in 2011 very aggressive stalkers began storming the barrier. Fact is, they've been recruited as the guardians of the sea consciousness to repel stalkers, since they, namely S.T.A.L.K.E.R's group, have and will find ways to reach the center of the zone. They are vastly superior guards than the mutants or zombified stalkers, since they retain most of their humanity, although they are completely under the control of the sea consciousness and will gratefully give their lives without question. The ecologists are scientists in the employ of the Ukrainian government. They've been sent to the zone in order to figure out how it works. They're also supposed to carry out scientific research that the government collects. The government pledges to use any such knowledge for the benefit of mankind, but I think it'd be safe to say that no such promise should be taken seriously coming from a capitalist government. Regardless, the scientists under their command take their job very seriously and are only interested in scientific discovery. This position makes them rather neutral towards other factions, and it allows them to cooperate with them when necessary. The mission of the Ecologists began in 2007 when the Ukrainian government first began expeditions into the zone. Originally, their mobile base of operations in Yantar was protected by the military. Unfortunately, after the emission of the Miracle Machine in Lab X-16, the soldiers were turned into zombie stalkers. Now the ecologists are reliant upon lone stalkers looking for work, mercenaries in duty to perform combat roles and carry out dangerous research missions. The ecologists are scientists that have little to no combat experience. Several areas of research are being focused on by the scientists. Due to the variety of phenomena in the zone, there is much potential for many fields. One of the most important is finding new sources of energy. The zone requires an incredible amount of energy in order to operate. Exactly what power is unknown. The emissions the zone puts out alone are considerable amounts of energy. By the very laws of physics, the sea consciousness must be getting a source of power from somewhere. Perhaps the zone itself is tapping into some kind of previously unknown source. There may be it generates power itself. The ecologists represent the scientific endeavor. They're not particularly motivated by morality. Their goal is rather neutral when we look at it in certain ways. To them, the pursuit of knowledge is the goal, and the morality or ethics of it are rather secondary. They're not ideologically driven like the other factions are. They care only for the act of scientific exploration. This is very similar to the Clear-Sky faction. However, they don't feel the particular duty that Clear-Sky does. This ideological neutrality leads them to be able to ally with almost any factions, except for, of course, Monolith and Bandits. Any discussion of morality or ideology with regards to the ecologists must be a discussion of the ethics of science itself. Humanity's relationship to science makes us the victim, the beneficiary, and the slave of it. We're locked into an ever-flowing relationship with our own intellectualism. The very thing that can improve our lives can also be the destruction of it. The most obvious example of this is nuclear power. It has the potential to solve all of our energy needs until we reach a point where our social organization catches up with our technological development. At the same time, nuclear technology has given rise to the greatest weapon that mankind has ever known, the nuclear bomb. The destructive potential matches the productive potential of the technology. Is it ironic that our salvation also lies in the greatest potential threat to ourselves? Is this not the same of science and technology itself? It also allows us to achieve such great feats, yet it also allows us to carry out the greatest of inhumanities. I think it is an excellent representation of humanity itself. We are capable of such good, while also being capable of great evil. I see it as an amazing paradox that represents humanity itself. Nuclear power allows us the power to give the gift of energy while also giving us the ability to destroy each other, just like human nature does. Is science good or bad? Are people good or bad? I'd like to argue here that they are different. Science is not good or bad. It can be used for either purpose, but it is not inherently one or the other. People, however, I'd argue, are essentially good. We are born with the knowledge or consciousness or unconscious that we all need each other in order to survive. People are not the economic Robinson Crusoe as bourgeois theory would have us believe. We all need to exchange the products of our labor if we are to survive. The commodification of such is in no way natural as some ignorant social works would have us believe. What will become of science in the future? I think it is bound up with the fate of humanity on the social front. The question is if our social evolution will manage to keep up with our technological evolution. One thing remains true no matter what. We're all in this together. Our fates are bound up together. One of the first factions established in the zone, Clear-Sky, was dedicated to researching the zone and learning its inner workings, and are not adverse to hiring mercenaries to perform missions, much like the Ecologist faction. However, unlike the Ecologists, they are more than willing to resort to violence to get their way, and are as fiercely protective of the zone as Freedom or even Monolith. The faction is neutral to all other factions of the zone, with the exception of Renegades, Bandits, and the Monolith. The Clear-Sky faction headquarters is located in an isolated village in the Great Swamps. They are poorly equipped, likely due to the fact they didn't have to fight anything other than mutants at the swamps, and were most inaccessible prior to the second emission. Clear-Sky was formed after a split occurred among members of the research team that caused the zone to emerge in the first place. Disputes concerning the cleanup of the aftermath of the failed experiment caused approximately half the scientists to leave. 3 of them, N.A. Lebedev, V.I. Suslov, and E.F. Kalansha, formed a Clear-Sky in order to research the zone and find a way to remove the fracture in the noosphere, or at least contain it so that it can be lived with. The faction set up a camp in the isolated swamps. Unlike most of the zone's faction, only their members know the location of their base. If the player needs to go there, the guide will blindfold S.T.A.L.K.E.R so that he cannot memorize the road. The Clear-Sky faction is rather a unique group out of all the factions. Each group has a particular goal based on political or ideological goals, or in the case of the bandits, pure profit motive. By contrast, Clear-Sky does what no faction does. They recognize the zone as something that is alive, something that has a level of consciousness. Their operations in the zone are dedicated to protecting people from the dangers of the zone based on that premise. Their goal is to repair or remove the fracture in the noosphere. They understand what the problem is. Duty, on the other hand, simply wishes to destroy the zone to prevent harm. What we see is that Clear-Sky has a more intelligent and nuanced approach. Clear-Sky wants to solve the problem. Duty wants to destroy the problem. In understanding this, we understand the difference between Clear-Sky and Duty, and more importantly, why they're not essentially the same faction. When the player is speaking to the head of the scientists of Clear-Sky, Bimpolev, he regards the zone as a living thing with a consciousness that reacts to the actions of people within the zone. Duty sees the zone as a force of nature which is destructive and must be stopped. In his observations, Bimpolev determines that the zone is reacting to events in a manner which could be considered similar to an animal. Despite the fact he doesn't understand why the zone is doing what it is doing, he recognizes that it is acting with a purpose. It's not merely a disturbance which has effects. Clear-Sky, unlike other factions, understand that there is a kind of consciousness behind everything, a mind that is thinking about things. In truth, this is the case. The zone is certainly alive. It is watched over by the sea consciousness. It is attempting to minimize the damage done to the world from the cracking of the noosphere. It also represents intelligently, deliberately to threats that approach it. In the story, the mercenary S.T.A.L.K.E.R's purpose is to track down and stop S.T.A.L.K.E.R. His actual motivations for doing so are not known. After suffering in a mission, he gains greater reflexes and strength. These new abilities are also tearing at his nervous system and will eventually kill him. S.T.A.L.K.E.R. himself doesn't seem to know why he has to stop S.T.A.L.K.E.R. from reaching the center of the zone. We learn in the story that essentially the zone gave him these powers in order to stop S.T.A.L.K.E.R. on their behalf. This would make him a kind of specialist agent of the sea consciousness as opposed to the typical monolith drones. It seems as though the zone is attempting to maintain a balance. As S.T.A.L.K.E.R. activity increased in the zone, it responded by increasing the frequency and intensity of emissions. When S.T.A.L.K.E.R. got too close to the center of the zone, it co-opted S.T.A.L.K.E.R. as an agent to stop him. It seems like there is a theme of balance when we look at the actions of the sea consciousness. During the last large emission, the expert in the Red Forest, Forrester, notes that the long-used paths have closed up, while other ones, which were impossible to reach before, are now open. As one door closes, another one opens, as it were. In another bizarre incident, Forrester gets lost in a new kind of Mobius ring-like anomaly. The zone gives him a new artifact called Compass. I theorize that the zone wanted Forrester to survive so that he would be able to help S.T.A.L.K.E.R. when the time came. I see the zone as closing the long-used routes to the center as S.T.A.L.K.E.R. activity increased, and it opened up new ones that only Forrester was going to know how to navigate with the use of a special anomaly that it gave him. The zone then placed spatial anomalies to maneuver S.T.A.L.K.E.R. into meeting with Foster. I think this was deliberate. The zone wanted S.T.A.L.K.E.R. to catch S.T.A.L.K.E.R. The goal of the player is to have S.T.A.L.K.E.R. catch S.T.A.L.K.E.R. before he can reach the center of the zone. S.T.A.L.K.E.R.'s fate after his mission is pretty bleak, but there are some assumptions that can be made. At the CNPP, after S.T.A.L.K.E.R. incapacitates S.T.A.L.K.E.R., another emission is unleashed that kills most of the Clear-Sky strike force in the area. S.T.A.L.K.E.R. is presumably either killed or turned into a zombified Stalker, or inducted into the ranks of Monolith. Most likely outcome is that S.T.A.L.K.E.R was killed by the emission, as outside of scripted emissions, and the first one being the intro cutscene, the second being shortly after the player first takes control of S.T.A.L.K.E.R. He will die if not in shelter. Furthermore, he's at the ground zero of the emission, likely making it far more lethal than being further away from it. Nevertheless, his fate is never fully resolved. Unfortunately, in the end, the Clear Sky faction is destroyed in the emission released by the Seek Consciousness. The majority of its manpower is wiped out, along with Lebediev, their leader. From that point on, the group just disintegrates and disappears. A sad end to a faction that, to me, was on the right path.